I get to talk about one of my absolutely favorite topics today, and that is the need for reading in our lives. We're doing a series on resolutions. And at the beginning of the year, people make resolutions, and then by week 2, they just allow those resolutions just to pass by the wayside. And so we have stretched this out for 4 months. This is the very last in the series. Some of you are thinking, yes, finally, done poking and prodding in my business. But a lot of people will make the resolution that I'm going to read more, and we're going to talk about it because I think it's a very, very important resolution. You guys have probably all heard the old axiom, leaders are readers, and there's a lot of truth to that. You've also maybe have heard reading gives you superpowers, and I don't know that I'd go that far, except that you can immerse yourself in a book and find yourself in a situation with superpowers. But I think reading does a whole lot for us, and I just want to talk about it today. There's a campaign now, and you can go to the website. Just Google "Do Not Read This," and there's a campaign called "Do Not Read This." I don't remember what the organization is that puts it on, but it's this idea that you should try for 24 hours to read nothing and see how challenging that is. It's really, really difficult not to read because when you're looking at maps, when you're looking at street signs, obviously anytime you're looking up something online, communicating via email, you're reading. And a lot of times we don't realize the incredible advantage we have as readers. And this has not been the case throughout history. It's not the case for many people in the world that they have the gift of literacy. And it's something we take for granted. And I'm going to try to encourage you today specifically in the area of reading books. Kyle last week talked about how we're a blogging culture nowadays. We read blogs. In other words, we read 4 paragraphs on a subject and consider ourselves experts. And so he talked about his philosophy students and how challenging it is because you can't understand Aristotle by reading a blog. You got to read books. And I want to encourage you to start diving into books. Christians have historically, especially since the time of basically Muhammad and the founding of Islam, been called the people of the book. This is what the Muslims have always deemed Jewish people and Christians as people of the book because we are people of Scripture. And we're believers that God not only revealed himself in a person in Jesus Christ, but that story got put down on paper. It passed through oral tradition for a while, and then it got put down on paper. And we consider it authoritative in our life. We consider a book as some kind, in varying degrees, but some kind of authority in our lives. We are people of the book. Christians and Jewish people are readers, almost by definition. That if you want to live an effective Christian life, some of it involves reading. The Bible has been translated into about 2,100 different languages. And what's really interesting is there are many, many cultures out there that the very first text that was ever written in their language was the Bible. And so it's been a high priority throughout church history for missionaries to go into cultures, to learn the language, and oftentimes even create written language where there was no written language so that they could transcribe the Bible into the new language. So sometimes there was no reading until Christian missionaries arrived. Reading has been very high on the priority list of Christians from the very beginning. Even in ancient days, they have what they call the Shema. And the Shema is this prayer that Jewish people will recite. And it starts off, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might." We talk about this in here all the time, that the foundation of Christianity is love, and that Jesus' message was this Shema. It's a description of the Shema. But does anybody notice anything missing from the ancient version compared to the version that Jesus talked about? Anybody see something there? It's the mind. And that I'll tell you, I've done some study on it, I've done some research on it, and I can't come up with a good answer, really, why Jesus included mind. And some of it has to do with going back to the original language and figuring out exactly what he was saying. But I'll just leave that hanging out there. That the church has universally believed that Jesus is kind of the end-all, be-all revelation of God. That he's like the climax of the story. And we find that in ancient days, they said that love God with your heart, soul, and might. And then Jesus threw mind in there as well. So the conclusion of the matter on how to love God, Jesus kind of solidified and finalized what it took, and it had to do with your mind. He added the mind. But it says, "These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. She'll teach them diligently to your children. She'll talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. So he says, you guys, oral transmission, it's passing it down orally, is you guys should talk about this stuff all the time. And then it goes on later, and it says, you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. They'll be frontlets between your eyes. In other words, you ought to have it in front of you at all times. So in ancient days, when it talks about how to love God with all you are, it says take this stuff that we're talking about and write it down and keep it in front of you at all times. So we have been people of the book from the beginning of the lineage, the narrative of time as far as Christianity is concerned. So books are important. Reading is important. The Prince of Preachers, Charles Spurgeon, used to talk to crowds like this all the time, and he had no amplification to do it. The guy just had a booming voice and would bounce it off the walls, but thousands would come and listen to him. And he said this, he said, visit many good books, but live in the Bible. So I'm going to talk about books as we go on, but I don't want to minimize the Bible at all. I'm a believer that the Bible is very important. We can talk about, and I've done some sermons in the past on how important it is and how it was translated and how we view the translation and the canonization of the process. I don't want to minimize the Bible by talking about books. So let me just spit it out there and say we've been people of the book from beginning, and if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, being a person of the book is kind of comes with the territory. But I want to talk about other books as well today. Bob Marley, who was not a Christian, he was not a believer in Jesus the way we would typically consider Jesus. But he said this, and this is in Spanish, but he says, emancipate your mind from mental slavery. So this is one of his songs. It's called Redemption. When he was 36 years old, he had cancer, he was dying, and this was the last song he wrote. And he didn't know this was going to be the last song he wrote, but it was. He says, emancipate your mind from mental slavery. And then he says, only we can free our minds. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment, but his idea was that you need to do something to think differently than you've always thought. And then later on in it, he talks about some of the bad things that are happening, and he talks about the people of the book. He talks about Christians. He says, some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. So he's talking about all these bad things that are happening, and he says Christians think this is all part of the story as it unfolds, the people of the book. So Bob Marley says you got to change the way you think, and then he applies the way Christians do it by talking about a book. Now, I don't think necessarily he was trying to say the same thing the Bible would be saying, but I think there's a sentiment that runs from cover to cover in the Bible that we need to free our minds. And you can't miss it if you read the New Testament, that you've probably thought lousy your whole life, and that God wants to change your lousy thinking into solid good thinking. This is a passage out of Colossians. It says, put on the new self. So it's this idea of being born again, starting over in life. It says you can start over. Doesn't matter what happened. Doesn't matter who you were. You don't have to be that person anymore. It says put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator, loving God with your mind. In Romans, it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. In Ephesians, it talks about a similar principle. It's this idea that if you'll change the way you think, you'll change the way you act. If you'll change the way you think, it'll change how you love people. That changing the way you think is pivotal to transformation. And kind of the whole message of the Bible is one of transformation. It's one of redemption and restoration. So it's restoring the mind to what it's supposed to be like. Kyle last week was talking about how we make experts out of non-experts and how often that happens. He did that on Saturday, for those of you that missed it. He talked about don't ascribe expertise to people that aren't experts, that if they haven't studied diligently, well, maybe you ought to look elsewhere for your knowledge. And I asked him a question over lunch, because as a pastor, as a preacher, and I think we need a pulpit like this is what I think. But I'd have to change my voice to sound like God, I think, if I had a pulpit like that. But as a pastor, one of the biggest challenges for me is coming up week in, week out, and having to stand in front of you guys and have anything meaningful to say. And it can be dangerous because just because I have the pulpit, you might consider me an expert. And I'm not. I'm just a guy that's doing his homework. I'm just a guy that's studying and doing the best he can. And so I asked Kyle that, is how do you handle that as a pastor when you know you're not an expert on 1,000 topics? Because really, if you guys stick around for 10 years, you're going to hear hundreds of sermons, and I'm sorry for that. But you're going to hear hundreds of sermons. I'm not an expert on hundreds of topics. I'm not even an expert on the Bible as much as I try. I'm what they say, jack of all trades, master of none. I guess that's what a pastor has to do. So I'm asking him, how do you handle that? How do you handle that responsibility and the pressure of getting up and preaching every week, knowing that you're not knowledgeable about as many things as you need to talk about? He said, what you can become an expert on is referring people to the experts. And that's what pastors can do well, is we can study and find out who knows the stuff and then transfer that information to you to the best of our ability. So the number one thing I want to tell you about reading, and we're specifically talking about reading books today, is that reading puts you in the minds of genius. What would you give to have an hour to sit down with Abraham Lincoln and pick his brain? Or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Or Mother Teresa? I mean, what would you give to be able to sit down and get in their brains? And it's just as simple as picking up their autobiography. I mean, it's just really fascinating what you can do. You can, in your living room, invite these people into your brain. And you can do it at any time, and you can do it cheaply. It's a real gift that we have the ability to read and read books. I heard recently that you are an amalgamation of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I don't necessarily agree with that because I spend time with my child and I would be a Lego by now. That would just be the reality. But it is true that we are highly influenced by the people that consume our time. We all know this. I had a buddy in college that when he said the word comfortable, he refused to say the whole word. It was too many syllables. He would say comf instead. He said, I'm going to go get on the couch and get comf, which is just stupid. I mean, isn't it really? But I found myself saying, I still to this day say, oh, I was so comf, man. I'm like, where did that even come from? And it's because of the influence of him. And linguistically, my language has been shaped. I found that when I spend a week in Ireland, I end up starting to talk with a little of an accent and then just sounding like a stupid American that's trying to pull off an Irish accent. But it just naturally starts to seep in, and people seep in. And if you fill your brain with the minds of geniuses, they're bound to seep in some. It's bound to influence you. This guy right here is Terence Tao, and it depends on who you read. He often makes the list of the smartest people on earth right now. Some people will say his IQ is somewhere between 160 and 170. Some will rank it as high as 220. But what they say about IQ tests is the higher your IQ is, the harder it is to nail it down as to exactly what it is. But he is a mathematician and a genius. And he has written many books on mathematics. So if you wanted to be a genius in mathematics, don't you think inviting him into your living room and busting out some formulas would be helpful? I mean, it would. There's no question about it. He could help you in mathematics. And you have that privilege and that right and that ability if you would just pick up his many books on the topic. Now, that might not be where you're at all. You might think, I have absolutely zero interest in anything he would have to say. I get that. What about Nelson Mandela? Nelson Mandela was a lawyer in South Africa that started basically fighting apartheid, fighting the separation of race that went on. He was convicted of sedition and spent years and years and years of his life in prison for his fight against racism. Eventually, he became the president of the country after he was released. He's now known as the father of the country. What would you give to sit down at lunch with him? I mean, just to hear his story, just to hear his take on the race crisis in America right now and what can we do? What would you give? And yet you can read him. You can read his books anytime. It's as simple as getting on Amazon and clicking the Kindle buy. For $8, you can spend hours and hours in the brain of Nelson Mandela. What is that worth? And we kind of laugh about it. We kind of say, well, I just don't like to read. Well, I got no answers for you except that's just plain dumb. It's just dumb to deny yourself of this privilege. Number 2, books are Cliff's Notes. They're Cliff's Notes, not Cliff Notes, just so you know. They're Cliff's Notes. So Terence Tao has spent his entire life, I don't know where he went to school, MIT at the age of 16, got his master's degree by the time he was 18, something like that. I'm just throwing that out there. Brilliant guy, studying mathematics, and now he's written all these books, and he's taken all that cumulative knowledge of years and years of studying mathematics, and he's broken it down into a few books that you can pick up and read. You can take an entire lifetime of studying math and break it down to a 4-hour session of sitting in your living room and reading. Doesn't mean you'll comprehend it all, but he's worked through all this, and now he's spitting out the results. Nelson Mandela spent years and years fighting apartheid, thinking about race issues, and now you can sit down and in just a few hours absorb all that massive, his whole lifetime, you can absorb in a few hours. It's almost miraculous. It's mind-boggling the amount of information that you are privileged to if you will read. Books help make you competent. Chanel, I did this for you. Chanel has a pug named Miko. Now, let's face it, we all question pug owners, right? Like, what is wrong with these people, right? But let's say she wants to be the best pug owner she can be. She wants to learn about the medical issues that pugs deal with, their temperament, the easiest way to train them, the easiest way to potty train them, the easiest way to make them your friend, what treats they like. What's a great way for her to do that? Read. Right? Find out some pug owners that have been successful. Can you even be successful as a pug? I don't even know if that works. But she can read. If you want to be an entrepreneur, there are thousands of books out there from experts who have done it and done it well and who have failed again and again and can teach you what not to do. They're all out there at your disposal, these Cliff's Notes that you can bring in and just learn how to do it. It's all there at your disposal. You're asked to be a basketball coach. You have a young child who enters basketball and they need an assistant coach, and you have no idea how to coach basketball. What should you do? You should read. I just saw this morning that Sergio Garcia is tied for first in the Masters golf tournament that's going on right now. If you want to learn how to golf like Sergio Garcia, well, you can't by picking up a book, but there is a book called Swing Like Sergio. If you wanted to learn about his swing and how he mentally tackles the game, it can help you be more like him as a golfer. Doesn't mean you're... So that's why I said it helps you become confident. You're never going to be Terrence Tao. You're never going to have his full knowledge of math. You're never going to be Nelson Mandela and deal with the things that he dealt with and be in the particular place in history that he's in. But you can let it influence your sphere of influence. You can let it influence who you are. And finally, and I just wanted to make this point because I'm passionate about it, is reading helps you become a better writer. Most people are lousy writers. And reading allows you to figure out how to write and write well. And again, it's just like Sergio Garcia. It won't make you a better writer, but it helps you recognize good writing when you see it. And as a communicator, it's important that you learn to write and write well. So the next point is that reading is a cheap education. If you want to learn about math, you can go buy a $9 book and bust through it. If you want to learn about how to raise a pug, it's all good. Love you. If you want to learn how to raise a pug, there's a cheap way to do it. You don't have to go hire a trainer. You can go read from trainers who have been there and done that, and it's cheap. I love the scene from Good Will Hunting where Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are in the bar, and Ben goes to try to pick up a girl, and another kind of a Harvard punk comes in and starts showing off all his knowledge. And Matt Damon basically puts him in his place and then says, there's two things that you need to learn. Number one is just don't. And number two is that you dropped $50,000 on an education that you could have gotten for $1.50 for a library card at the public library. Now, that's not to diss public education at all. I think if you have a passion, being educated at the university is a good idea. But you can become pretty dang knowledgeable for about $1.50 at the library. Reading makes you attractive. Drew Knott is here. He's a reader. I mean, come on. Case in point right there, right? Drew reads constantly, and I mean, he's got this aura about him, right? When I talk about being competent, and I talk about being educated, being competent and being educated is attractive, period. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean smexy, like sexy smart. I'm not talking about physical attraction or finding a mate, but what I'm talking about is influence. People who are educated are more influential. It's just the reality. And so if you'll read, it will start to expand your horizons as far as how you influence people. It will start opening up possibilities for you that you didn't have before. This is the weirdest sentence I ever wrote on a slide, but reading smokes a cat. They say cats have 9 lives, and they also say if you're a reader, you can live 1,000 lives. So you smoke the cat. That's what I meant by that. You thought, he's smoking something, right? That's what you're thinking. I remember the very first time I ever mowed the lawn as a child. I was about 10 years old, and Mom finally released me to go mow the lawn. She taught me how to do it, and I was just about as tall as the lawnmower handle, so I was pushing it like this. The reason I remember mowing the lawn, and it's vivid. I mean, I can tell you where the spots are on the lawn that you need to move around. I can picture the buildings. I can picture the shape of the grass. And the reason is because I had just finished my first full novel. It was called Magician by Raymond Feist. It's a 2-part book, Magician Apprentice and Magician Master. Now that sounds really dorky to you, but I confess I'm a dork. And in Magician Master, or in Magician Apprentice, you've got this little boy who finds out he has these magic powers that start coming up. And by Magician Master, he's learned to master these powers, and really amazing, outstanding things have happened. But I finished that book that day, and I was left with this reeling, like, what just happened to me? Like I was living in another world, is almost what it was like. I was living another life. Some people say that's healthy, some people say it's unhealthy. But I think I've always been a believer that people have like something hidden in them that could come out and change everything. I think every individual in this room right now has been gifted with something that is just super powerful and could come out. And I wonder, how much does that come back to me reading that novel at the age of 10? Is this idea that there's something hidden in people, buried, that if it would just be allowed to come out. But I've been able to live in so many worlds. I've been able to get in the minds of so many people and live so many different lives because I'm a reader. And those of you that are readers recognize this, is that it expands your horizons, and it smokes a cat. So that's pretty cool. It's a massage for the brain. There is something about sitting in front of a fireplace with a hot cup of beverage and pulling out a book that there's just kind of no comparison for. There's something about, one of my favorites is to go lay in a hammock and read a book. And what studies have shown is that when you read, something happens to your nervous system, something happens to your brain, and it calms you. It's a massage for your brain. It brings peace. At the University of Sussex, they showed that 6 minutes of reading will reduce your stress levels by about 68%. And this was all measured biochemically. They measured brain patterns, they measured your heart rate, and so forth. About 68%, as opposed to 61% for listening to music or 42% for taking a walk. If you're feeling stressed out, if you're feeling overwhelmed, pick up a book and lay in a hammock, but not this hammock. I just feel like that's just a bad idea in general. Reading is also brain exercise. You know, to build muscle, you got to lift weights. You got to have we talked about this in January, micro tears. And micro tears happen by pushing your muscles beyond their limits. And it builds muscle and makes you strong. And what happens in the brain when you read, and it can be shown neurologically, that what happens in your brain is similar. It will literally change your brain. We talk about fixing your mind and transforming your mind. It literally, biochemically happens when you read, is that your brain patterns change, and change in a positive way. They become strong. So studies have shown conclusively that if you want to fight off dementia, if you want to fight off Alzheimer's, be a reader. It's statistically certain at this point that being a reader consistently staves dementia. Now, for most of us, it's almost like when we say, you know, if you do trans fats, it causes heart disease. And we think, well, I'm only 23. What do I care about heart disease? Someday you will care. Alzheimer's and dementia are awful, terrible things. And here's a pill that you can take that will increase your longevity, whereas that's concerned. And I'm telling you, once it starts on, for your family and for yourself, you'll wish you had been a reader. It strengthens your brain. It's muscle building for the brain. So here's some tips on where to go from here. So it's a good idea. What do? I want to encourage you to come packing, which means carry books with you. Now, you can do that on an electronic device. I put them on my phone, on my Kindle. You can scroll page after page after page of the books that I've got lined up to read on my Kindle. It's just as simple as putting them on your phone, or you can carry paper books. But I want to encourage you to start carrying books with you. We would never think about leaving the house without our phone and our keys. Make books something that you consistently take with you. Number 2 is book binge. We all know what binge watching a TV show is, right? Now, if you binge watch every episode of The Office or Parks and Recreation, it will not massage your brain. It will not strengthen your muscles. It's almost the opposite effect. A lot of times we think, I don't have time to read, and yet we know every quote from The Office. Okay? There's no great excuse for not finding time to read. So instead of, and I'll tie it into, I'm going to skip ahead and come back, this 80-20 rule. I'll tell you the remember first class thing is, if you get on a plane and you walk through first class, guess what the people sitting in first class are doing? They're reading. Typically, not everyone. Nowadays, you see them doing their little games or whatever a little bit. But in general, just do it. Next time you get on a plane, watch what the people in first class have done, and they've pulled out books. And they've got mobile devices open, and they've got books on. And in coach class, they're firing up the movies. They're firing up the video games. Think about it. Now, when I say the 80-20 rule or the 60-40 rule, I'm not asking you to give up video games or give up binge watching Parks and Recreation. I'm not asking that. What I am asking is that instead of doing it 5 nights a week, why don't you take 1 night a week and binge read instead? Why don't you pick up a book, and you'd be surprised. I read an entire, Kate gave me a great book this last week, and I finished it on Monday. I took a little retreat, and I read all day long, and I finished an entire book in like 4 hours or 6 hours. You can bust out books fast if you'll just dedicate some time to it. So use the 60-40 or the 80-20 rule, and just start setting something aside in order to read more than you do, and invest in it. I had somebody approach me the other day talking about how they have issues with dyslexia and that it prohibits them from reading or it inhibits them from reading. And I would encourage that person to invest in help in that area and do their best to get some help so that they can read, but also you can invest in audiobooks. I do think audiobooks are a little bit of a different situation, but it's a great way to consume the same kind of information by investing in audiobooks. And when I say invest, is spend some money on your library. Last time we moved, golly, we packed, just stacks of books. It was probably, it would almost cover this screen, the boxes of books that we moved on. Build a library of great books that you love and invest in it. Get a Goodreads account. Goodreads is social media for readers. If you've never heard of it, go to goodreads.com. and connect with all your friends, and you can find out real quick what they're reading, and you can recommend books to them. It's a great little reading community. And then finally, start a wish list. This is what I do on Amazon. Somebody says, hey, you should read such and such book. I don't have time to read that book right now. And people come to me all the time and say, hey, will you read my book that I'm writing? And okay. So start a wish list on Amazon and start plugging in the books that you want to read. And then once you've busted one out, go to the next one on your list and pull it out. And you can even go to the public library and pick it up. You don't even have to order it. You can just keep a list of books that you want to read. So here's my plan for the next few minutes. I'm going to talk about books that I recommend. This may seem goofy to some. This whole thing may be ridiculous to some of you, and I get that. But I'm a believer in reading, and I've got some books to recommend. My wife tells me that I read the most boring books on earth. Here's some of the ones I've read recently, and these are not the ones I'm going to recommend. Did God Command Genocide? There's a downer, right? This is not the stuff, and these are actually, these are kind of broken down, simplistic. These are not like the academic versions of some of this stuff. But and the theology of Karl Rahner is something, he's a Catholic theologian. For a Protestant guy, I read a lot of Catholic people. But I'm not going to recommend this stuff for you right now. It's great stuff, but I'm going to try to find stuff that is more readable, stuff that you'll pick up and actually read through, kind of page-turning stuff. So I have other books on my list that I would recommend, but the stuff I'm going to recommend is more stuff that you would actually pick up and read right now. Number 1 book on my list, no questions about it. If you haven't read any other books, stop reading whatever you're reading and start reading this. It's called The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. And then Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And then everything else C.S. Lewis has ever written, okay? Just why read anything else until you've absorbed Lewis's arguments? The Great Divorce is a story of a guy who gets on a bus stop in purgatory. He's at a bus stop in purgatory, and the expanse of hell is behind him, and the glory of heaven is somewhere else that the bus is going to, and it's about his journey, meeting people between heaven and hell. It's just a fascinating read that I think, and it's a page-turner. You can easily read it in an afternoon. Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster. We did an entire series on in here a couple years ago. So you can just look at Celebration of Discipline on our website to find out my breakdown on this book. But he's a Quaker, and it's a book about Christian disciplines like fasting and study and prayer and confession. And it's just an excellent book. Peace Child by Don Richardson, the best public speaker. And there's a list of these out on the next table, by the way. I see a lot of you taking pictures. You don't have to do that. I made a list for you. They're out on the next table. Just pick it up on the way out. Unless you're taking my picture, which I completely understand, because I'm a reader, and readers are attractive. Don Richardson, incredible speaker. He was a missionary to cannibalistic tribes. These were tribes that had never seen white people before. And he came in, interesting story. They would open a can of green beans, and the cannibals would watch them. And they said, oh, inside, there's a picture of green beans on the inside, and there's green beans on the outside. There's a picture of green beans on the outside, there's green beans on the inside. So the cannibals really freaked out the first time he opened baby food because there was a baby on the outside of the jar. They thought he's one of us, right? He learned their language. He spent years learning their language. The very first sermon he preaches, he tells the gospel story. And he gets to the part of Judas betraying Jesus, and everybody gets quiet and still. When it's been chaos before, chickens running through, dogs running through, kids screaming and yelling. But when he got to Judas, everything got ultra quiet. And what he found out afterwards is they viewed Judas as the hero of the story. Because in their culture, the highest ideal would be to betray a friend and eat them. And later, something happened that in one moment, one little story, everything changed, and the entire tribe converted to Christianity and came to follow Jesus after years and years of frustration in a tribe that viewed Judas as the hero. I won't spoil it for you, but I'm telling you, you want to read this book. It's a fantastic book. Riven, I don't even know how to pronounce it, by Jerry Jenkins is a novel that I would encourage. It's a novel about a pastor who's kind of disenfranchised, and he befriends a guy on death row. And actually, I debated two books here. I want to recommend another book that's not on my list and is not on the screen. It's called Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger by Ronald Sider. It will forever change how you handle your money. Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger. To End All Wars by Ernest Gordon is his story about Kanchanaburi, Thailand, and his involvement in the Death Railway during World War II. Fantastic book that leads to the cross, basically. And I can't believe that I'm recommending something and even saying the words DC Talk in church in the year 2017. But their book, Jesus Freaks, is phenomenal. It's absolutely fantastic. It's basically a compilation of what you find in Fox's Book of Martyrs, which is one of the most read books of all time. And it's the story of it's story after story after story of people who gave up their life for Jesus. Bob Goff has a great book called Love Does. This is one of the ones we give away out here. It's his story of loving people well, and it's just chapter after chapter of really neat stuff he did to try to love people. S.D. Gordon has a list of books called Quiet Talks that I've recommended in here. He's an incredible writer. Quiet Talks on prayer, Quiet Talks on following the Christ, Quiet Talks on the victory of Jesus. I don't remember all the names, but I just highly, highly recommend them. There's a Counterpoint series. This one's called 4 Views on Hell. And what they do is they find the experts and they let them all say their piece. So it's 4 views on hell, there's 3 views on women in ministry, there's a few views on the atonement, there's views on what happens in the afterlife, there's views on biological origins. I mean, it's just a long series of let's bring in the experts and let them hash it out. And it's really interesting. So like in this one, Clark Pinnock, he'll give his case on hell, what he believes about hell. And then the other 2 authors, Hayes and Wolford, will they'll counter his argument, and then he'll have a final say. And then the next one will do his article. And it's just really fascinating stuff if you're into this stuff. Some of it will bore you to tears if you're not like me. Letters from a Skeptic from Greg Boyd. Greg was a Christian apologist. He was arguing for the Christian faith. His dad was a skeptic. And he wrote his dad a letter, said, "Dad, can we talk about this stuff?" And his dad said, "Yeah, we can talk about this stuff. Let's talk about the Crusades." How is it possible throughout history God let people do such terrible atrocities in the name of Jesus, in the name of his son? How is that even possible? And Greg wrote him back. And it's this collection of letters back and forth as they argue until ultimately his father becomes a believer towards the end of the book. But it's just brilliant. Raising Cole is a book about a man who was he was raised by poor farmers. He says the only person who ever knocked him out was his father. He was a football player. His son was a football player that played for Texas. And it's the story of him being a tough guy, loving a son with gentleness, and his son passes away, and it's how he coped with that. It's one of the most gripping, tear-filled books you've ever read. If you're a parent, you should read this book about how to raise kids with compassion. And then finally, there's a series called Christian Heroes Then and Now, or there's another series called Heroes of the Faith. Adoniram Judson, this is one of many. So Martin Luther might be one of them. Mother Teresa might be one of them. There'd be all kinds of, they're biographies of these Christian heroes. Judson, our son is named Judson after Adoniram Judson. That's where we got the name. We've named our son after this missionary. But here's just a fascinating snippet of his story. He had gone to Brown University. He was the child of pastors. His dad was a pastor. He went to Brown University and he met a friend named Jacob. And Jacob convinced him that Christianity was false. So he rejected Christianity, but he didn't tell his father because he knew his father would hate it and that it would be a big hubbub. So he embraced deism and rejected Christianity. Went home, finally told his father. His mother followed him from room to room crying, "How could you do this to your mother?" And he had rejected Christianity. But he was traveling back to New York and stopped at an inn one night, and they only had one room left. And there's two versions of the story, and I'm not sure which version is accurate. But one is that he was put in a room with someone. The other is that he was put in a room next to a room with someone. But the someone was dying of tuberculosis. So they said, "You're not going to get any sleep tonight because he's coughing, hacking, and wheezing, and he will do so all night long." And so it was that way. Either he was in the room with them and there was a curtain drawn between them, or it was the next room over. It's kind of unclear. Regardless, he lays there that night thinking about mortality, thinking about death, and thinking about, what if Christianity is true? Then I'm making a big mistake by embracing deism. And then he thought, well, what if Jacob could hear my thoughts right now, man? He would think I was an idiot. I just can't even think about this stuff. And the short of it is, so all night long, he hears this person coughing and wheezing. He doesn't sleep at all, and he questions his own mortality. The next morning, the coughing has stopped, and he asks the innkeeper what happened, and the person passed away in the middle of the night. He says, "Oh, that's terrible. Do you know who it was?" And it was Jacob Eames, his buddy from Brown University, had been dying in the room next to him. And Jacob had been speaking to his brain all night saying, "Don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it." And this was a transitory experience in his life, a transitional experience in his life. It was a conversion experience in his life. It impacted him greatly. And there's story after story after story that are similar in this book. They're fascinating books. So reading, in my opinion, can be fascinating. I'm going to close with this, what I thought fascinating passage out of Thomas Merton. I'm still reading his biography. It's about 4,000 pages long, and I'm at 53% of the way through it. Oh, gosh. 53% of the way through it, according to my Kindle. But Thomas Merton's conversion occurred like this, or at least the beginnings of his conversion. He entered a church, and a lot led up to that. But he says, "I found a place that I hope would be obscure, and I knelt down. As I knelt, I noticed a young girl," and that ellipse right there, he says it was a pretty girl. He says perhaps 15 or 16, kneeling straight up and praying quite seriously. So he sees this pretty 15 or 16-year-old girl who's praying. I was very much impressed to see that someone who was young and beautiful could, with such simplicity, make prayer the real and serious and principal reason for going to church. She was kneeling that way because she meant it, not to show off, and she was praying with an absorption which was serious enough to show that she was not thinking at all about the other people who were there. What a revelation it was to discover so many ordinary people in a place together, more conscious of God than of one another. Not there to show off their hats or their clothes, but to pray. He says this girl impacted him greatly. Like it was kind of a mind-blowing experience for him to see this girl pray. And he talks a little bit later about the aftermath of what that experience meant to him. He says, I couldn't understand what it was that had happened to make me so happy, why I was so much at peace, so content with life, for I was not yet used to the clean savor that comes with an actual grace. He wasn't used to grace. He hadn't seen that in his life ever. He says, all I know is that I walked in a new world. Even the ugly buildings of Columbia were transfigured in it. And everywhere was peace in these streets designed for violence and noise. And I love this part. Sitting outside the gloomy little Child's restaurant at 111th Street, behind the dirty boxed bushes, and eating breakfast was like sitting in the Elysian fields. If you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, you've seen the scene where he dies and he walks through the fields and there's wheat, and his family is coming to him in the distance. That's the Elysian fields. In Greek mythology, that was heaven. So he says, I go to this church, and I see this girl praying in sincerity. I've never seen anything like that before. I've never seen a church where people weren't just there to show off their clothes. I've never seen grace active in somebody's life before. And he says, when I saw it, something happened in me. And I left, and I can't explain why I'm so happy, why I have such peace. And that this dirt alley behind a restaurant, and I imagine it being a place with dumpsters and flies, he says, that place was transfigured into heaven for me. And I put that up there just to point out that if we're a church that believes in transformation, and I'm a believer that God can, through many, many avenues, get a hold of a person and show his grace and show his power, I think reading is a great place to start. It may be really weird for a pastor to get up and say, hey, you guys should read. But I do it because I believe you can have experiences much like Merton's experience. You could read this passage and have the same experience he had. That you could walk out of here transformed, thinking. It could transform some of you, it could transform your view of why you come to church. You might come for social reasons. You might come to show off your hat. And it had never even really crossed your mind that maybe you should come in here and just worship God with some fervor. And one little passage in one little book might just open that up for you. And I'm just a believer that reading does that, and reading is worth investing in. So I encourage you to do it and do it a lot.